the Everything But Politics podcast.
Welcome back to another edition of the Everything But Politics podcast. Joining us today from the great state of Massachusetts, Seth Rosenbloom. Welcome to our show.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's our honor. We've been listening to your music since this was scheduled, and I must say, you got me into the blues right now, man. You got some good stuff.
Well, I appreciate that. I always like to try to bring it to a younger audience. I mean, I'm on the younger side, and it's like, going to shows and everything. There's often not that interest, and always try to bring it to the next generation.
And Seth, my first question for you is, when did you first realize you wanted to pursue music professionally?
Ooh, that's tough. I don't know that there was ever a moment that kind of clicked. So I grew up, both my parents were musicians, met in music school, and grew up right outside Boston. My dad was the concertmaster of the Boston Ballet Orchestra, played with the Boston Symphony and Pop. So I grew up playing violin in his footsteps. My mom played violin too. And I think that normal barrier that a lot of musicians you might talk to run into, where it's like, oh, it wasn't a sustainable career or wasn't really an option, that never existed, because my dad was very much the breadwinner and he was doing it from a career in music. So I mean, growing up, I was absolutely obsessed with baseball. That was my first real love. And after the arm injuries came and the dreams of playing professional baseball went away, there was never really another thought. Like, I always knew it was an option. I guess it was probably sometime after I started playing guitar, because I never as I played violin growing up, there was never a time that I saw myself as a professional violinist. But with guitar, I've always had the personality thing where I don't do anything unless I'm going to try to do it really well and to the fullest extent. I mean, definitely by 13, 14, I knew that's what I wanted to do. So it was pretty early.
And Seth, what was that transition like from being a classical violinist to then learning guitar? Are there similarities, or was that hard to change over?
Yeah, that's a great question. Physically, with the instruments, there's a lot of carryover, especially with the left hand. In large respect, the guitar is easier because you have frets instead of, on a violin, you're creating all your own intonation, and that creates some huge challenges. Musically, obviously less carryover. Now, that being said, like, growing up, my mom was a massive Beatles fan, saw the Beatles on their first US tour. So
sweet.
I was hearing the Beatles around the house all the time. She was a big James Brown fan, Motown fan. So I was getting a lot of blues adjacent stuff. My grandmother was a huge Elvis fan. So I was listening to a bunch of Elvis, and, a lot of that early Elvis is blues, rock and roll, rockabilly, all that stuff in that area is very closely related. So it's not like, even though I was playing violin, that was my only kind of musical exposure. And I always liked guitars. Like, as a little kid, there were guitars around the house, and I never really learned how to play, but I banged around on them. And so I was always the transition. Like, I had those influences off the jump when I started playing guitar, and then it was everything my friends or, teachers, and I'm talking actually more teachers at the school I was at than even guitar teachers, because I was adamant I wanted to be self-taught. But early on, kind of got heavy into Metallica, heavy into like prog rock, Rush, Dream Theater, all that. And yeah, the blues kind of, there was a very much a starting point for that. But yeah, it's music.
Yeah, right
I've
on.
always kind of thought it's good music or bad music, but it's all music.
Did you ever, after picking up the guitar and getting very invested with that instrument, you ever go back and play the violin?
There were about 2 or 3 years where I played both, because my dad really pushed for a while there to stay kind of involved in the classical music thing. I mean, I when I was 12, uh there, now it's called BIZO in the Boston area, but it used to be GYPSO, Greater Boston Youth Symphony Orchestra. And it was, at the time I had started playing guitar, and I was starting to kind of lose interest playing violin, and he very much saw that and thought, okay, maybe if he's having an outlet to really play with other people, perform, it'll kind of catch that bug back a little bit. So it was because up to that, like, I played for assemblies in school, and anytime I was playing with anyone else, it was like being accompanied by a pianist or by my dad. And this was a string orchestra, probably, I don't know, 60 or 80 kids, or full orchestra, maybe not that big, maybe 50. But it was every Sunday of the school year from noon to 4, rehearsals down at the music building at Boston University. And the only way he got me to do it is he bribed me with a new guitar to do it. So even that, it was like a far cry. But I played both for a couple of years. He tried to get me to play viola. It's like, you don't have to, with the facility you have on the violin, can probably do fine there. But yeah, after a certain point, it didn't stick. It was really after I got out of middle school, I was just playing guitar.
That's pretty cool. So musically, do you take that experience, like sheet music, reading music? You probably know music theory, right?
I do. Yeah.
So did you learn all of that while playing the violin, and then did you take that into guitar playing?
That's a great question. It's a mixture. So in terms of theory, it's funny because there are some big valleys between the theory that you're going to learn or need to play classical violin or be a classical musician, and anything that falls into, we can call it, whether we call it pop or jazz, but everything that's like rock, blues, jazz, funk, all of that is kind of separate. Like, chord wise, my knowledge was terrible, because you're not playing chords on a violin. So, and even when I went home and was like, hey, I'm learning about seventh chords, major 7 chords, my dad was like, what's that? And it's because that just doesn't come up there. So some of my knowledge was carried over and was way ahead. I mean, scales and everything, sure. I think the most valuable carryover was just the musical knowledge of, like, I started so young. I don't remember learning the notes. I don't remember learning, time signatures. Some of that stuff was just so baked in. But reading music wise, I can't remember the last time that I had to do that.
Yeah.
Occasionally I run into a student who's like, hey, I want to learn to read music, and my first question's always why. It's like the only friends that I have that really need to read are and it's the last time I had to read, I know, was playing in the pit band for a musical. Like that, you're gonna have to read. If you want to do TV or film scores as a guitar player, you're going to have to read, but chord charts. But aside from that, like, I don't really draw on that whatsoever, that side of things, at least.
And with blues guitar playing, a lot of it comes back to improvisation.
It does.
And you can't chart that. You just feel it, and that's kind of the cool part about your transition that you went from playing to the sheet note for note to playing the blues guitar and really expressing yourself differently.
And that was probably the most challenging and baffling part of that musical transition for me, because you're absolutely right. Where, I think a lot of classical musicians will tell you this, for the most part, you are paid to play the notes that are written on the sheet of music in front of you. And I have no idea what I'm going to play at the start of every gig. And I love that part of it. But it was, as a teenager, I started going to a lot of blues jams in the Boston area. I was playing on a, like, past Little League. I think it was maybe a Babe Ruth or like Connie Mack League baseball team. And one of the other kids' dads knew I played guitar, and he was like, "Hey, you should come out to this blues jam." And it was still when I was kind of skeptical of blues even, but it was an outlet to go and play with other people. And I started doing it, I'd find 2, 3, 4 jams a week. And, you get thrown into the deep end and got to figure out how to improvise and what to play.
Yeah, definitely.
Traditionally, is violin a key aspect to blues music?
No, not at all. I've played no blues violin, all blues guitar. The violin left way back in the classical music land. I have seen a couple blues violinists, but and I have had people suggest, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if you could, as a party trick during the gig, bring out the violin?" It's like, no, not for me. It's great in bluegrass and in country, but not so much in blues.
Something I just thought of that's kind of cool with violin and guitar that was probably pretty helpful for you is that you were able to build a finger calluses with violin, and then going to the guitar, you already have it. It's not as sore or whatever.
Very early 20s, I had the experience. I was living down in North Carolina in the Raleigh area, and ended up for close to a year teaching in a music school, teaching kids all guitar. But I always, at that point, it was a good learning experience for me, because I always struggled teaching beginners, because I never felt like a beginner on the guitar. And I also don't remember not knowing music. So I don't even really remember being a beginner on the violin. And you will see so many kids quit, more so than adults, but adults too. But so many beginners quit within the first, I don't know, 2 to 4 weeks, because it hurts. And it does. Like, that is a barrier. And I never had that. It was like, yeah, I did have something of built up calluses to make that easier.
That's pretty cool.
Seth, I want to talk a little bit about your original music.
Yeah.
You're primarily known for blues guitarist. When you were creating the songs that you have now on Spotify and Apple Music, was there ever a thought to make a song that is not so bluesy and make it pop or jazz or country?
Yeah, I try to always, because on the last 2 records, and it's a relevant question because I'm in the middle of writing for a new record right now. The last 2 records were both 9 tracks, and they were both 6 originals, 3 covers on each of them. And I always have, first of all, with like the originals to covers thing, if there's a song out there that I think is going to say what I want a song to say, I won't try to write the song. I'll cover it if I like it. But in terms of writing, I feel like as the records go, I start stepping a little more outside of the box. Like the first EP I did was very much everything was you would put in the blues rock camp. Keep on Turning, that record, I would put everything on there very much in the blues rock camp. The last record is The Crow Flies. It's like there was kind of a country song on there. There was kind of like a more, I don't know if you'd call it jazz, but other influences, because when I'm listening to stuff, it very much is not only blues. I mean, don't get me wrong, I listen to a ton of blues, but if you went into my like Apple Music history, I think it would surprise some people. So when I'm writing, I mean, our strategy for this new record is, right now we're doing the first half of the record in October, and I'm writing 10 tunes to pick the best 5 from. So already gonna have some stuff on the cutting room floor. Maybe not. If they're all good, that'll be the second half of the record too. But I sometimes have had to say, like, hey, I need another up-tempo tune, or I need another ballad or something like that. I try not to be like, I need this style, I need that style. I try to serve the song and let come out what's going to come out. That being said, it's like I have those influences, and I think I've been starting to get less shy about letting those through and not feeling like I have to do a very certain thing. And don't get me wrong, some days I listen to an old Albert King record or a Fabulous Thunderbirds record, and it's like, hey, I'd like to just play 2 hours on a gig of traditional shuffles and slow blues. And then there are other days when I'm listening to any number of other things. Like recently, do you guys know Miles Kennedy, singer for Alter Bridge, also for Slash and the Conspirators?
No, I'm not
Great
familiar.
rock singer. Probably,
Okay.
I think he, like, my opinion, but I think maybe the best living rock singer. So Alter Bridge was the band that came from kind of the aftermath of Creed, with Mark Tremonti and then Miles Kennedy. And Miles is a fantastic guitar player too. And his stuff, he has a new single out that I've been digging, and it's like blues tinged hard rock. So it's heavy, but it's like it's kind of got a little bit of the bluesiness there. And that's the stuff I'll listen to, where it's like, if that comes out, some of that influence comes out on the new record, great. If it's more traditional stuff, great. But I never go into the writing trying to do a certain thing. I think often that ends up being not all that authentic. I have often had to say, hey, it's really easy to write a blues song of my girl left me, if you, sometimes it's like, okay, let's not do another heartbreak song. But aside from that, really haven't tried to steer it too much.
So Seth, when you record your music, I assume you guys record in a studio, and I was wondering, do you record everything yourself, or do you bring in other musicians to collaborate with?
Yeah, I do what I do myself, which is play guitar and sing, and that's it. So it's kind of evolved, and each record's been a little different. The EP was very much, when I did that, did most of it live in the studio. It was done in like a day and a half, and it was kind of the idea of, here's a business card if you want to book me for a gig. Keep on Turning was done out in LA at Josh Smith's studio. Josh is one of the best, blues guitar players, producers, performers out there. And so that one, Josh, really orchestrated in terms of hired all the musicians. It was a dream team of a band on that. I mean, it was Gary Novak on drums, it was Travis Carlton on bass, Scott Kinsey on keys, great horn players. So, and that one did in 2 chunks, very much kind of multi-tracked that though. So got the basic tracks and then overdubbed probably 95% of the guitars on there, went back in, got the tones we wanted. And then As the Crow Flies, I did at a great studio in Boston, self-produced that one, had the guys who I am normally going out playing gigs on the road with. So the goal with that was to get a bit more of a live feel and to minimize overdubs as much as possible. So I brought in another guitar player for that, where it's like, okay, I'm going to try to catch all those solos live, because if you're tracking, I think for some genres, it doesn't matter as much. If you're doing a pop record and you want it to have like that sheen on it, it's a different story. But blues, country, rock, it's like, you think about all those great records. You think about Cream, you think about Zeppelin, you think about, Van Halen. That's a band in a room playing music. And once you lay down the basic tracks and you go back to try to cut a guitar solo, if there is any amount of, dynamic change, energy change, now you're trying to play to the band.
Yep.
Where if you're tracking it live, it's like, you kind of have to make that decision of, do you want the note for note perfection where you're going to fix everything, punch everything in, or do you want the energy?
Yep. That's a good
And I
point.
think the answer is, what are the favorite albums of all time? If you ask me, it's like, I have my blues albums, which mostly are live records, but like studio record wise, it's Stevie Texas Flood. And Stevie Texas Flood, the story is they played that record like 3 times through in the studio and just took the best takes of each tune.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then the others for me, it's like Zeppelin 1. That's
great.
band playing. Van Halen 1, same thing. So I very much like that. And I think the promising thing is it seems to be coming back in style across genres. Like, I'm not a big modern country fan, but I have friends who very much are. And it's like, apparently, and I don't keep too much up on it, but I was actually on a golf trip about a week and a half ago with my best friend, and he's I can tell you one thing about him. He's a massive fan of Morgan Wallen and Zach Bryan. And right now, Zach Bryan more than anything. So we had a speaker, we're in the cart, have the speaker going, and he refused anything other than Zach Bryan. It's like, all that stuff's cut live in the studio, and it's very much going for that lower production, like more real thing.
Yeah, like that raw recording.
Yeah, which is cool, because I think that's so much of like what I love about a lot of old blues records is that thing where it's like, that's a band playing music. It's not trying to make it perfect. It's trying to bring the perfect energy, and it's trying to have that intention behind it.
And Seth, speaking of golf, recently saw on your Instagram that you hit a hole in one. Tell us about that.
I did. So
That's awesome.
Had a June little run out tour in the Southeast with good friend of mine from Knoxville, Andy Wood, who's a great guitar player. We did Raleigh, Wilmington, and then to Nashville, and kind of camped out at a friend's house, and he has a place down in Pinehurst.
Unreal.
And so it was right after the US Open, and we had played gigs Wednesday, Thursday, had off days Friday, Saturday. So played Pinehurst number 3, which is often overlooked course there. It's shorter course. It's like 5,200 yard par 68, but it's the greens are like minuscule. It's like a scaled down version of number 2.
Wow.
So yeah, 8th hole there. It was a wedge, but one hop and in. It was my 3rd. I've had 2 at my club up here.
That's special.
And
Great.
then the next day, last minute got on to play Pinehurst 2, 5 days after the Open.
Wow.
Which was the hardest round of golf I have played in my life.
You break 100
Sunday pins. I did. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'll say this. I'm right now a 4 handicap, and
that's solid. Yeah.
I've been down around a 1, and
nice.
I shot 92, and I was pretty happy with it. And that was after shooting 72 the day before on number 3.
Wow.
Yeah.
You got game. You got game.
Decent. Was just so went back with that friend who we played 3 and 4, and 4 is a great course too. But boy, every time I'm down in Pinehurst, I consider a move.
I've
Yeah,
never,
none of us have been.
none of us have been to the state of North Carolina. That is
So I lived
bucket
in
list.
Raleigh for a couple of years, and Raleigh has great golf. Like, all of the college courses in the Raleigh area are unbelievable. When I lived down there, early 20s, it was like 200 something bucks a month to be a member at the UNC course, which is fantastic.
Sure.
The NC State course is great. The Duke course is great. And then you drive, it's about an hour south to Pinehurst, and you get Tobacco Road, you get Pine Needles, Southern. Like, there are just a million great golf courses. And then the resort itself, like, it's worth the trip. It
Yeah.
really is. It's about as good as it gets. The weather down there most months are fine. I mean, it's not Florida for 12-month golf season, but it's 10.5-month golf season, and
Yeah,
I highly
solid.
recommend it.
That's awesome.
So would you consider yourself a better musician or golfer? 'Cause you
Oh,
are.
I better be a better musician. I mean, I'm not trying to do anything but win the club championship at my club as far as golf goes. But
Do you have
I
any
do
club
love it.
champion wins?
I do not. I had a heartbreaking loss 2 years ago where my club does 54 hole just stroke play, so 3 days medal play.
Everything in the hole.
Everything. Oh yeah.
Okay. Nice.
Oh,
Playing it
real
down.
golf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on.
And it was a rainy Sunday, and I kind of started off slow, shot a low round on the second day, and then going into the back nine the final day, was tied for the lead, and made a quad bogey on the 10th hole to lose the club championship by 4. So
Wow, that's brutal. That's
that was a
brutal.
brutal one.
Now, do you feel more pressure in that golf situation or before you're about to go on stage?
Oh, golf without a doubt. But I think I don't have real stage fright or anything like that, but it's interesting because, and I've talked about this to a lot of people, like, the reasons why I love golf are the same reasons why I love improvising and going on stage, because it's a lot of the same pressure, same adrenaline, same kind of mentality and focus. I mean, I'd played golf a little bit as a kid, a lot early 20s, especially when I was living in North Carolina, and then was touring a lot for a few years and was playing maybe 5 to 15 rounds a year. And then COVID hit and everything shut down. No gigs, nothing. And I think a lot of people figured that every musician was just at home writing, woodshedding, practicing, but it was, I know, at least for me, the least inspiring time, because I like the outlet. I like going and playing gigs. I like going, making records, and none of that was possible. And I just started golfing again a ton, because it's like, I need something that I'm trying to be really good at. I need that outlet. And yeah,
That's cool.
I try to balance both as much as possible, but obviously one pays the bills and one never will.
So Seth, when you play a gig, do you use the same band you use in the studio, or do you have different guys that play with you?
No, so if I'm doing stuff in the Boston area, studio work wise, it'll be very consistent with who I take out live, but it's also somewhat like the economics of being an independent artist in 2024, and where travel costs through the roof, everything through the roof. And it's like, often, if I'm, say, flying into the West Coast to do a run, I'll hire guys in LA, get in day early, and I have enough guys out there. Same thing when I've done Florida. I've often used a Florida rhythm section, and it's somewhat the luxury in a way of not being a band. You know, if you bought tickets to go see Metallica and only James Hetfield was there, you'd be like, wait, that's not Metallica. But when it's just, you know, my name on, it's like no one in the audience really cares who's behind me, as long as it sounds good. Yeah, so I have the guys I like to take out, but for multiple reasons. The other really being, I've always found that unless you have the consistency of dates, talking, you know, 100 to 150 dates on the calendar year after year, it's hard to have guys commit who you'd want to commit, because the guys that are good get called for a lot of gigs. And you know, you can't tell someone, hey, don't take any other gigs, because everyone's trying to feed their family.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So on average, how many gigs do you think you play a year? And also, do you have like a booking agent who books them, or do you book them yourself? Or
So both those things are very very related right now. So the last few years have been strange, because had a lot of momentum. 2019 into 2020 had a record that Keep On Turning did really well at the top of 2019, and was on the road pretty constantly. I mean, going into 2020, had been in the UK, then had done West Coast, had done Southeast, everything. COVID hits, and you know, nothing really happened until mid 2021, and then everything was getting up and rolling. Well, everything had started to level out, and then early last year my booking agent was hospitalized and then passed away.
oh, sorry about that.
Thank you. Everything that was coming on the calendar basically got wiped out, and you know, it took a bit to regroup. So we've been considerably lighter on the dates the last couple of years because of that. Have started to kind of accelerate here now, but it's been, as we try to find the next agent, it's been me really doing everything,
Doing the outreach.
which you know, I don't have necessarily the same pull or name recognition as an agent does, because a lot of venues just want to talk to the same 10 agents that they know will deliver.
That's interesting. And you know, speaking of delivering, you've put out music, you've been successful releasing music. What are some of the key things when it comes to distribution and in making sure that your music or podcast or anything that you're creating reaches people?
I feel like I'm still trying to figure that out. It's tough. I mean, music wise, at least, and I can't speak to knowing the podcast side of things at all, but music wise, it's like, first of all, it's hard because you're trying to reach people via streaming, where streaming is basically the advertisement, because you're not making any money on streams. I mean, it's minuscule. I think the biggest thing that I've learned, and the thing that I'd say, is not to try to do the things that you have no idea how to do. So to try to outsource and to try to put a good team around yourself on the things where you know that you need help. So it's like, I know that I could just go through, I don't know, there are all the distribution kind of channels to streaming sites of I don't know, TuneCore, and there are a few others.
Like DistroKid and that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
and those always seem to have one issue or another, stuff gets. I found a really good digital distribution guy early on who handles you know, all of the stuff, making sure that all the music is everywhere it's supposed to be, that
That's good.
the artwork's right, that the release date, that the formats. He also takes care of a lot of the like Spotify playlisting and submitting for a lot of the editorial stuff. So press, it's like having something of a press strategy and then hiring someone who's going to execute it.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't have the contacts at all the blues and guitar magazines, but
No
there are
doubt.
people who are really good at that. And it's like, you got to kind of figure out where you want to go. I mean, with the last record, I really put a premium on trying to get it onto satellite radio more than every little kind of college radio station, and just looking at the economics of sending, how many CDs you have to send out
Right.
to get places, different things.
Absolutely.
So kind of sent it to a lot of the DJs who had been supportive in the past, and then really focused on satellite. But yeah, I think it's always trying to stay up with what the kind of current, not market trends are in terms of you're shaping your art to that, but market trends in terms of what social media platforms are driving the most traffic, what what's going to get the most eyeballs on the stuff, and also just what feels authentic. Like, I've never done Twitter because I don't think I have anything interesting enough to say to be posting 156 character tweets.
So,
Yeah.
Seth, are you an independent musician then, or are you signed to a label?
I am independent.
Cool.
And would you have any interest in joining a label?
Probably not. I'd have to
Okay.
see the deal, but it's like,
Yep.
what does a label bring to the table?
Mhm.
Well, I think, like, looking at someone like Zach Bryan or Benson Boone, who's getting really popular, it seems like what they provide is that exposure and distribution,
And the
but then
network too.
at the same time, they might want 50% of your rights.
Right.
So you got to have the give and take. And like we said earlier, Ethan and I are in a band, and there's that consideration because we have 2 singles out. We're working on a 9-song album, and there's always that consideration of, if someone did reach out, is it worth it, or is it worth to just play the longer game and play things out, but you control everything.
It's also the genre thing
Mm-hmm.
of, if I was a modern country artist, I might speak very differently about that question.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But what blues label is there out there that is
That's a great
really
question.
driving it? I mean, Alligator's still doing really well. I mean, Kingfish has done great on
Kingfish.
Alligator.
He's killing it.
And then, you have Provogue, which is part of Mascot, which is, and a lot of those, like, I wouldn't at all be opposed, if any of them are listening,
Yeah,
to doing
come
some
on.
kind of a distribution deal. But it's like, in terms of the record itself, there are things for me that are non-negotiable. Of, I want to record the songs that I want to record,
Mhm.
how I want to record them, with the team around it that I want. Of, I've had the same mix engineer and master engineer on both records. I have no plans on changing. Alan Hertz is a mixing genius, and Eric Boulanger at the Bakery in LA is, I mean, that's one of the best mastering studios out there. I don't care about footing that bill, because it gets the final result to where I want it to be. And like, that's the stuff I just won't compromise on. And then it's looking for a label. It's like, a lot of labels are a lot of labels are trying to do like the 360 deal thing, where it's not just a percentage of revenue of streaming and anything related to the music, but it's like, is it cutting into merch and touring and all that? Because the reality is it's not like my streaming numbers are massive, but they're big enough where you're seeing, you know, what the return or lack of return there is. And I'm not one of the guys who's saying, oh, streaming's evil, we have to go to something else.
Yeah.
Because I look at it from the practical aspect of, is it better for the consumer? And the answer is obviously.
Yeah.
It's like, look at me, I'm a musician and I'm using Apple Music because it's so easy. I want to listen to something, I type it in, it's there. And it's like CDs ain't coming back.
No.
I mean,
people like records, but they're like more of the
also
look.
Right. So my question with records always is, everyone says, oh, records are coming back huge. And look, being in blues and having an audience that skews on the older side, I still sell a decent amount of CDs.
Okay.
Most of the people even buying the CDs are buying it for the autograph.
That's interesting. Like
And
a physical thing.
Right. And a record looks cooler. Like if I have to pick between, do I want a signed CD or signed records? Like signed record, you put that up on the wall, it looks great. My question is always, how many of the people buying records own a record player? Because my guess is it's less than half. And it's like streaming, the most you can hope for is, sure, Netflix has gone from what, $9 a month to like $20 a month. I don't even look anymore. But yeah, sure, Spotify and Apple Music, maybe they'll go to $20. It's not going to increase those royalty payouts to where, you know, they're at a CD level. That's never coming back. So it's, what can you do that works in the current climate?
Well, and I feel like you kind of have to embrace it. There's really no other way but to like make the most of it, because it's pretty amazing that, like, you being from Massachusetts, your music can reach somebody in Africa right now and they could just be listening to it. And that would not be able to happen if there wasn't the streaming services like Spotify and Apple Music.
Right. It's the good and the bad of everything, because I think that you see this a lot where, you know, I don't at all believe in kind of the overnight success thing, because there's always that period before, but it's like the escalation of certain artists once, I mean, now it seems like it's TikTok. Once something goes crazy on TikTok, it's like all of a sudden this person you've never heard of is playing arenas and selling them out. And I think that happens faster now than it ever did, where it used to be, you go play clubs for 3 years playing 6 nights a week, and then if you gain enough traction you can kind of spin it up. So there are pros and cons to all of it, but at the end of the day, the way that I look at it is, I hear so many musicians who complain and complain and complain and get bitter about it. And sure, for recorded music, were CDs you know, if we could go back to the 1990s, early 2000s, is that better for recording musicians? Absolutely.
Yeah, they're
But
making
is there
more
any
money.
chance of that happening? No.
No.
So why even you know, waste the time on it when there's no chance of going back?
Yep. Great point.
And Seth, besides the Kingfish you mentioned earlier, I'm not that familiar with up and coming blues guitarists besides yourself. Who are some other guys who you think have made a name for themselves in the last couple of years?
Are you talking really up and coming or kind of current on the scene?
What do you mean?
Because I probably have answers for both, and I always preface these answers with saying I don't want to offend any of my friends that I forget in the moment. But I mean, you know, there's some of the big names currently on the scene. Of, you've got Joe Bonamassa, who's doing
he is beast.
Great. Joe's awesome. You know, Kenny Wayne Shepherd's out there still,
he's killing it. Yep.
doing great. And then you have kind of, not that he's at all new to the scene, but you have Eric Gales, who Eric's
Okay, yep, I'm
incredible.
familiar with him.
You've got, a lot of the guys of kind of that generation of Matt Schofield, who's down in Florida. Matt's fantastic, from England, but down in Florida. You've got, Matt down there, Josh Smith and Kirk Fletcher out on the West Coast. You've got, Greg Koch in Wisconsin area, and he's all over. So you've got kind of those guys, and then really up and comers. There's a Kingfish would be one. There's another guy from Massachusetts, a few years younger than me, Quinn Sullivan, who's great. He, as a kid, I know, kind of came up under Buddy Guy, and we've met maybe twice, but have a lot of mutual friends. And he's kind of going more the songwritery, like Mayer-ish direction, but very bluesy, and he's great. Eddie 9-Volt has become a good friend, and he is just, if you want to see a great like soul blues show, it doesn't get much better than that. Taz,
He's good.
Taz is great. I first met him when he was like 15, and he was already just blowing everyone away. So there's a lot of promise. There are a lot of people coming up.
Are you familiar with Philip Seiss from Canada?
Philip Seiss, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
I have
great.
never met him, but I've seen him on Instagram and YouTube and all that.
Yeah, he's cool. Something I wanted to talk about with you, Seth, because I'm also a guitar player. I'm a big gear junkie, and I love all the stuff you use. I was wondering how you kind of got into guitar gear and the different types of things you tried and got into.
Yes, so I think I was predisposed to having the collecting and bug. My dad very much was into violins, and then also into antiques and furniture and that kind of stuff. So I always liked old things, and I liked experimenting and trying things. And I think early on, the guitar market is not that it's cheap, but it's so much less cost prohibitive than like the violin market, where it felt like, okay, for a few $100 I can try a different guitar. So early on, like, I was always buying guitars, trading them for something else, and going down different rabbit holes. I mean, first guitar ever was an Ibanez, and I haven't owned an Ibanez in quite a few years. But I think the experimentation with gear helped me find my voice and what I liked, because nothing like, I'll say this, tone, yeah, 80% is in the hands and in the player. I mean, I can pick up any guitar, any amp, and I'm still going to sound like me. One of the greatest players out there, a guy in Nashville, Jack Pearson, briefly played in the Allman Brothers, but I remember seeing him. I lived in Nashville for a bit when 11 years ago. Now, I just turned 32 when I was 21 when I lived there, but he used to play the Station Inn, and I know he was playing, I think it was with Josh Schilling on keys, on great keys player there. I don't know who was on drums, but Jack Pearson would walk into the Station Inn with a Squier Strat, a Blues Junior, and a Boss overdrive pedal, and sound better than anyone. And it's like, the gear does not make the player, but the gear's fun, and I love gear. And I found out kind of what I liked and what I didn't like, and what was going to let my voice shine through. And I'm always looking for what's the next thing.
So do you like playing vintage guitars or more modern? I saw you have that really cool PRS you play, but then you got some
Yeah,
vintage
I'll say,
Stratocasters
can I
too.
say both?
Yeah, no, I get it.
I mean, it really is a both thing. Of generally when I go out right now, it depends if it's a local gig or on the road. On the road, I've generally been taking 3 guitars for local stuff. You know, within a few hours, I'll take 4 or 5 just because I can. But my number one, and it always will be, I have a 1956 Strat
Wow.
that is, it kind of came by chance. I went into a shop. I was actually looking at an amp, and it was sitting there, and it was the greatest Strat I'd ever played, and I made it happen. It was more money than I had ever, paid for a guitar at the time, but it was a lot cheaper than it would be in the current market.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so that always goes out, aside from sometimes if I'm flying. I also recently got a 68 Gibson ES345,
That's pretty.
which has been going out a lot, and I love that. But then I've got a bunch of great PRSs, and generally that guitar that I don't go to a gig without, in addition to the Strat, is I've got one of the McCarty models that is just, it's bulletproof, and it's a rock machine. It's everything you want it to be. If it's like simple, easy, great. And I feel like a lot of people with PRSs really baby them, keep the finish nice.
Yeah.
Oh, that thing has some battle scars. Like it it's been played plenty, but I'll take that out. I've got a great Telly style guitar from Iconic Guitars. They're out in California and just relaunched, and that thing goes out every time I need Telly. So yeah, it's, I like it all. I like it all. I mean, amps wise, I've been pretty set for amps over the last, I don't know, 5 years or so now, using 2 Rock amps, and they do everything that I want a good amp to do.
Yeah. How'd you first get introduced to 2 Rock? I saw them a couple years ago. Haven't played one yet, but they look terrific.
They are well worth the play. They're awesome. So I had been familiar with 2 Rock amps for a long time, because a lot of the guys that I was listening to, I'd see playing them. I had seen Matt Schofield playing them for a long time. I remember seeing Eric Gales play them. John Mayer had played them for years. And then it was, do you guys know what the NAMM show is? Yeah. So National Association of Music Merchants, big trade show out in Anaheim every January. So the one for 2019, good friend of mine who just did that tour with Andy Wood had done a show the year prior at a smallish venue. It held maybe 200, 250 people in Fullerton, the town north. And he was moving his show to a bigger venue. And I said, hey, you mind kind of passing that venue off to me? I'm going to try to put something together, and had the idea to just call some friends, everyone do, 20, 25 minute set, jam together, and be fun. So that first one had Matt Schofield, myself, Josh Smith, Kirk Fletcher, and Ariel Posen, who
he's
played
great.
the Brothers Landreth. Ariel's fantastic.
Yeah, he's really good.
I turned him on to my favorite Boston breakfast place, and he and his band always stop there now when they're coming through. But all of those guys, I think even Kirk, but like Josh, 2 Rock, I met. And so reached out to Eli at 2 Rock, and it's like, hey, would you be interested in backlining the gig? And they had done NAMM show things before, and he was like, totally. So that kind of started the relationship. We did another one, NAMM 2020, and it's the best. I mean, Eli's a good friend, and a genius of an amp builder. I mean, is great. They're a great company. They build fantastic amps. My number one quality for an amp always is, can I kind of half abuse it on the road and it's never going to go down? And
Yeah.
I'll knock on wood, but I've never had an issue with a single two rock, and I have 3 of them at this point, and
Wow.
they're the best.
How do you think the two rock compares to like a vintage Fender Super Reverb or Vibreverb?
I can talk to that very well because I sold my I had a 67 Super, and I'll say this, and I don't think Eli would hate me saying this because he's a big old Fender fan too.
Mhm.
Look, if I could have a Super Reverb and have it on 9 at every gig, I'd take out a Super, but I can't do that. You're playing a
Mhm.
150 cap seated jazz club, you're assaulting the entire audience. And I have owned a number of vintage Fender amps, and I've sold them all in favor of the two rocks,
Wow.
because the two rocks to me get me everything I want tonally, and they do it. I mean, I won't say that they can do it whisper quiet. Some of them are better than others at really getting the volume down, but they can do it at a much wider range of volumes where I can open them up if I need to. But I know also if I'm playing a little local something for a friend, I can take one out and it's going to
Mhm.
work perfectly. So yeah, I love vintage Fender amps. I
Yeah, they're
just,
awesome.
the two rocks really do everything that I want, and the Super, I was just getting frustrated where, aside from like outdoor gigs or the occasional bigger like theater gig, I couldn't set it where I want to set an
Mhm.
amp like that.
Seth,
And
this
then,
has been an incredible podcast. Before we let you go, I have a question. What could our listeners and your listeners who are listening to this expect in the future? What's to come?
Yeah. So going in the studio in October to start the new record. So
Right
that
on.
should hopefully, be released sometime 2025. Lot more dates out on the road coming, and also have some other cool projects in the pipeline that that'll start to be
Right
revealed
on.
soon. But my website, Instagram, everything always will have all the goodies and all the updates.
awesome.
Awesome.
Right. Thanks for
Well,
joining us,
thank you,
and
Seth.
we'll see
Thanks
you
so much
guys
for
next
having
week.
me.
Appreciate you, man. Thank
Keep-
you.